A single rifle shot cracked through the high desert night. The flames that followed devoured the silence like a living thing. But it wasn't the fire that broke. Caleb Prescott, it was the way his hand trembled afterward. Not from fear, but from something far deeper. A quiet, unbearable knowing. Something had just shifted in the world, and it would never shift back. The year was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was as dry as the Bible. Caleb still kept wrapped in oilcloth under his bunk. The land had a way of scarring more than just skin it, carved itself into your soul. The wind carried sand like whispers of old wars, the kind men no longer spoke of. And Caleb, now in his early 40s, carried the weight of 2 gravestones in his bones. Martha, his wife, and Daniel, their son, both gone to fever 3 years before, buried just beyond the fence line, where no flowers grew, only the stubborn sage. His ranch lay about a half-day's ride west of a place the locals called Redemption, name soaked in irony and dust. The town offered nothing but overpriced whiskey, crooked poker games, and eyes that lingered too long on a man who didn't speak unless he had to. Caleb had lived 3 years in that silence. Just him, his horses, and whatever memory he could keep from slipping through the cracks. That morning, the windmill pump finally gave up. Caleb had kicked at it once, then again more out of habit than hope. When it didn't respond, he dropped to his knees in the dirt beside it, stared at the heavens with tired, angry eyes, and whispered, "If you're still there, God, if you still give a damn, then give me a reason to keep breathing." The answer came not in rain, not in lightning, but in the creak of his saddle hours later as he rode into Redemption, dust rising like ghosts behind him. At the edge of town, he saw a crowd gathered near the saloon. Not the usual gambling ruckus. Something was off. Men laughed, but not the kind that carried joy. It was the sharp, cruel laughter of hyenas in human skin. In the center of the circle stood a horsey paint stallion, magnificent but half mad with fear. Its eyes rolled white, its coat streaked with dried sweat and old scars. A rough rope cut across its throat. Beside it stood a girl, or a woman, barefoot, her ankles bound in rawhide, her long black braid laced with feathers and dust. Her face unreadable. Apache. Caleb guessed from the beadwork, from the stillness in her eyes. And there was Garrett Van Selleck, loud, and twice as dangerous as he looked. The self-made king of Redemption. He spat tobacco at her feet and shouted, "Won the horse and the squaw fair and square. Trapper lost 'em both in a hand of cards." The crowd howled. Caleb said nothing, but something cold twisted in his gut. A flicker of old anger, of something he'd buried years ago. Something that smelled a lot like shame. "She's a wild thing," Garrett sneered. "Silent as sin, but got magic in her hands, they say. Tamed that devil horse once. Now she just stands there like a ghost. Makes you wonder what she's seen." Caleb's hand dropped to his saddle horn. Not out of aggression, out of memory. Once, during the war, he'd spared an Apache scout left for dead by his own commander. For that, he'd been branded a traitor, left with broken ribs and a discharge without honor. He'd never spoken of it. Until now, it had never mattered. The girl turned, met his eyes. And in that moment, there was no town, no men, no fire. Just a question, unspoken between them. Who was chasing her, and what did they think she'd seen? Caleb stepped off his horse, slow, deliberate. The wind kicked up behind him like breath from the Almighty. He didn't look at Garrett, didn't look at the crowd. He looked at her, and without meaning to, whispered one word, "Yes." She didn't speak as he lifted her onto his mare, didn't flinch when his hand brushed her shoulder. Her wrists bore angry welts where the bindings had been, but she held herself straight in the saddle, silent, proud, unbroken. Caleb led them out of Redemption without a word. No one tried to stop him. Garrett Vance's laughter followed them, hollow and sharp like broken glass. The ride home took until dusk. She never asked where they were going. She didn't ask for food or water, but he saw the way her eyes lingered on the horizon, watching, waiting. as if expecting someone, or something, to come from behind them. At the ranch, Caleb helped her down. She stumbled once and he caught her elbow. She looked at him then, not with gratitude, but with something older than the desert, older than pain. She was not afraid of him. He gestured toward the lean-to by the barn. "It's dry. You can rest there." Still nothing. Just a nod. Inside the cabin, Caleb lit the lantern. Its glow settled over the familiar emptiness, the Bible on the shelf, the tin cup Martha used to favor, the rocking chair that had sat still for 3 long years. He laid out a second plate of food but didn't expect her to join him. Still, she came. She sat across the table, her posture straight, her eyes calm. She ate slowly, deliberately, never once looking away. There was no conversation, only the sound of fork on tin and the wind scraping across the roof. But something in that silence changed the space. It felt less empty. Later, by the fire, he handed her a blanket. She took it without a word and stepped outside. He watched from the doorway. She stood for a long time beneath the stars, head tilted back, lips moving in a language he didn't know. A prayer, maybe. Or a lament. When he closed the door, his hand brushed the Bible. Without thinking, he opened it. The page fell to Psalm 34-18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." He stared at the words, then snapped the book shut. "You're late," he muttered to no one. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Dreams of fire, of a boy's laughter, of a woman's hands brushing dust from his coat. When he woke before dawn, the girl was already outside, standing by the corral. The stallion woke a wild and scarred paced in agitation. She stood motionless, arms at her sides. Then she began to hum, low, steady, a sound that seemed pulled from the earth itself. The horse stopped, ears flicking. After a long while, he stepped toward her. Caleb watched from the window. Something about it unsettled him, not fear, but recognition. He'd seen this before. Not the song, not the horse, the stillness, the quiet strength of someone who had lost too much to be afraid anymore. Later, he walked past her lean-to. She was inside, tending to her wrists. He paused at the threshold. "Do you have a name?" he asked, voice low. She looked up, eyes dark as canyon shadow. "Nayeli," she said. He nodded once. "Caleb." They said nothing more. But it was enough. A thread stretched between them thin, but real. That night, while tending the stove, Caleb noticed a thin band of woven leather on the table. Apache made. Old, ceremonial. He picked it up. Inside the pattern, barely visible, was a mark he hadn't seen in decades, the crest of Black Kettle, the peace chief slain in a betrayal Caleb had read about once in a military report. He looked toward the lean-to. She hadn't offered it as a token. She'd left it where he could find it. A warning, a story, a beginning. And he suddenly understood the question that had haunted him since the street in Redemption. Who was chasing her? And, more importantly, what secret did they want buried with her? Before we dive into everything, let us know in the comments where are you watching this video from. Connecting with viewers from all across the world has been a huge source of inspiration for us. The first night passed in fragile silence. Caleb had offered her the lean-to again, but this time she declined. Instead, she lay her blanket near the corral, where Woka paced beneath the moonlight, still haunted by ghosts no one else could see. Caleb didn't press her. He understood the pull of the night, the need to sleep beneath stars when walls felt too close, too loud with memory. At dawn, she was already moving, her shadow long across the yard. She checked the water troughs, touched the fence rails as if listening through her fingertips. There was a purpose in her movement, silent, deliberate, like someone who knew the land, not from ownership, but from reverence. Caleb watched her from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand. He hadn't offered to take her back to town. He hadn't asked where she came from. Maybe he was afraid of the answers. Maybe he already knew. She approached Voka without a word, and the horse, skittish just days ago, stood still under her hand. Her fingers moved gently along the scarred hide, and she began to hum again, a sound more ancient than language. Caleb felt it, deep in his ribs a vibration, a memory of Martha humming lullabies over Daniel's crib. By noon, the sun was high and unforgiving. Caleb was repairing a broken gate post when she appeared at his side, holding a clay pot of water. He accepted it, nodding thanks. She didn't leave. "You know horses," he said, the words rough from disuse. She nodded once. "They trust you." Another pause, then, "They listen." He smiled faintly. "I reckon I've forgotten how to." That was the longest conversation they'd had. Later, as shadows lengthened and heat softened, he worked by the barn while she sorted through a bundle of sage and dry leaves. From time to time, she looked toward the hills beyond the creek bed, her eyes narrowed not in fear, but in sensing. That evening, she placed a small pouch filled with herbs above the barn door. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "For protection," she said simply. "Against what?" She looked west. "Whatever rides the wind." He didn't ask more, not because he didn't believe her, but because he did. Out here, you didn't question instinct. You respected it. Just after sundown, a chill breeze swept through the ranch. Caleb paused mid-step. He wasn't a man easily spooked, but something in that wind carried a weight like distant hoofbeats muffled in sand. He looked up at the moon, barely a sliver. He walked the perimeter twice that night, rifle slung over his shoulder. The land was quiet, but his gut told him the peace wouldn't last. He stopped near the corral. Nayeli was there, standing still beside Voka, one hand on the horse's neck, the other holding a feather tied with red string. A prayer, perhaps, a warning, or both. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Something was coming, and in his bones, Caleb knew whatever it was, it had already caught their scent. 2 days passed. They didn't speak much, but in the quiet, something steady formed like a fragile bridge stretching over silence. Caleb repaired the water pump with Nayeli's help. She knew tools better than most men, her hands precise, movements fluid. There was grace in the way she worked, as if her body remembered survival when words failed. But that second night, something changed. Just before midnight, Caleb stepped out onto the porch. The night air was thin, sharp, and too still. He paused, listening. The coyotes were silent. The owls, too. Not even the wind whispered through the brush. Then came the sound, a dull thud. Faint, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Distant. Slow. He stepped off the porch, barefoot, rifle already in hand. Moving past the barn, he crouched behind the trough and scanned the horizon. Nothing, just the outline of hills under moonlight. But he knew what he'd heard. By morning, the tracks were clear. Not fresh, but not old either. 4 horses, riding wide around the property, keeping just beyond sight. Scouting. Nayeli found the same tracks by the dry wash. She crouched low, fingers brushing the sand. They circled, but didn't stop. Why? They're watching. Waiting. For what? For us to get comfortable. Caleb's jaw tightened. Garrett. She said nothing, but her eyes confirmed it. That night, he double-bolted the cabin door. He gave Nayeli a shotgun and showed her where to hide the bullets. She didn't flinch, only asked how many shells he had. 8, he said. 9 if I use the old one behind the stove. She nodded. It'll be enough. But Caleb wasn't sure. Not against what Garrett might bring. The third day, Caleb rode to the edge of the ridge to look west. Through the spyglass, he spotted smoke-thin lines curling against the horizon, too narrow for cooking fires. Signal fires. Whoever it was, they weren't bothering to hide anymore. When he returned, Nayeli was boiling water and herbs. She offered him a cloth soaked in sage and juniper. For clarity, she said. He took it without hesitation, pressed it to his brow. You believe in signs. I believe the land speaks. And what's it saying now? She looked toward the hills again. They're coming. But not yet. How can you tell? She didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, The wind is holding its breath. That night, as Caleb sat by the hearth sharpening his knife, he glanced at the Bible on the mantel. The pages still held the shape of a verse he hadn't meant to remember. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The words came back to him like a taste of something old and bitter but true. He looked at Nayeli, sitting by the window, watching the stars. She was humming again, something ancient and melodic. Not fear, not sadness, preparation. Somewhere beyond the hills, Garrett Vance was waiting, and so were they. By the morning of the fourth day, the ranch felt different. Wovoka stood calm in the paddock, his wound nearly closed. Caleb watched him from the fence, brushing his hand along the rail. The animal no longer flinched at movement. Instead, he followed Nayeli like a dog, his eyes soft when she spoke. Caleb fed the cattle while she tended to the vegetable patch near the creek. It hadn't borne fruit in over a year, too dry, too barren, but she knelt there anyway, planting something from a pouch she carried, seeds wrapped in corn husks. "What are you growing?" he asked, coming near. "3 sisters," she replied. He blinked. "What?" "Corn, beans, and squash," she explained. "They grow stronger together." Never seen them make it out here." She patted the soil. "They've never had someone who believed they could." That silenced him. Later that afternoon, she approached with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a salve thick and greenish. "For your hands," she said. "The splinters." He hesitated, then let her apply it. Her fingers were rough but gentle, like the land-scarred, patient. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I was." "What changed?" "You haven't asked me to leave." He nodded slowly. That was true. At sundown, they sat on opposite ends of the porch. He rolled a cigarette but didn't light it. Instead, he spoke. "My wife's name was Martha. She loved stories. Used to read out loud on nights like this. Daniel, me boy, he'd pretend not to listen, but he always sat nearby." Nayeli didn't speak, but she didn't move either, just watched the light fade. "She died from fever." He followed a week later. "I buried them both under the cottonwood yonder." A long pause. "I never knew a god who let that happen," he muttered. Nayeli's voice was barely above a whisper. "The Great Spirit grieves too. Even when the fire comes, he walks with us." He looked at her. "Do you believe that?" "I have to." Silence fell between them again, but this time it was soft, like snow. That night, Nayeli sang as she braided a cord for Wovoka's saddle. The song had no words, only rising tones, falling hums. It filled the cabin like incense. Caleb didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. Something in it reminded him of Martha's voice, and of prayers said not with lips, but with tears. He found himself whispering, not even meaning to, "God, if you're still there, don't let me fail again." From the window, Nayeli looked at Jaime, not of pity, but of knowing. "You won't," she said simply. That was the first time she called him by name. The 5th morning broke with the scent of dew and burning sage. Caleb found Nayeli near the corral, packing herbs into a pouch made of deerskin. She worked quietly, fingers steady. There was purpose in her stillness, like someone who had waited years to be seen. "You never told me where you came from," he said. She glanced at him, then back to her task. "San Carlos." His stomach tightened. "The reservation?" She nodded. "Before that Chiricahua land. My people never asked for fences." Caleb said nothing. Nayeli sat back, pulling a thin necklace from around her neck. Tied to it was a strip of faded cloth, embroidered in red and black, the kind of weaving few knew how to make now. "This belonged to my sister," she said. "She wore it when the soldiers came." His jaw clenched. "You were there?" She nodded once. "They came at night. We thought they were escorting us to safety. They shot the elders first, then the children, then burned everything. My father, he tried to speak to them. He'd served as a scout during the Apache wars. They killed him anyway." She held up the strip of cloth. "I found this in Garrett Vance's saddlebag when they caught me. He didn't take it by accident." Caleb's mouth was dry. "You're saying he was there. I'm saying he led them." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She unwrapped a second bundly charred, broken medallion bearing the U.S. cavalry emblem. It had been scorched but still bore the engraving. 6th Cavalry, Fort Apache. His men wore these, she whispered. He gave orders. He laughed while they burned my mother's body. Caleb took the medallion. His hands trembled. I thought I saw him in the smoke, she said, eyes distant. Didn't know his name until I heard it in town. He stood, pacing the porch. That bastard. He's not just a slaver. He's a butcher. Nayeli didn't answer. Caleb looked out over the hills. The wind was rising a Gendry, restless. He turned back. You planning to run? She shook her head. I came this far to find him. You want revenge? No, she said. I want truth, and a place where the dead can rest. The silence between them pulsed like a drum. He looked at the medallion again. This is enough to hang him. No, she said gently. It's enough to make him kill again to keep it hidden. Caleb exhaled, slow. Then we need to be ready. That evening, he loaded every bullet he owned, and for the first time in years, he set Martha's old Bible on the table. Not to read it, but to hold it, like a man clinging to a raft in storm waters. The 6th morning came gray and windless. Caleb didn't like it. It reminded him of Tennessee, 1864, just before Cold Harbor, when the sky hung heavy and the birds refused to sing. He saddled Voka, tied down the rifle, and left the ranch before first light. He didn't say where he was going. Nayeli didn't ask. But as he rode toward the mesa, her eyes followed him, still and wide. He reached the old chapel ruins by mid-morning. It stood alone, nothing more than scorched beams and a leaning bell frame, half swallowed by sand. He'd never rebuilt it, couldn't bear to. Martha had chosen this place, said it was where she felt closest to God. Caleb knelt beside the broken altar, pulled from his coat a pouch wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a silver cross. It had belonged to a scout named Hosa, an Apache boy, barely 17. Caleb had saved him once during the war, dragged him out of a trench, tied his wounds, disobeyed a direct order. The court-martial didn't happen, but the shame stuck deeper than any bullet. He held the cross now, fingers white around it. I failed him, he muttered. I failed all of them. The wind stirred the ashes. You didn't fail me. Caleb turned. Nayeli stood at the edge of the clearing. Her braids were loose in the breeze, her eyes softer than usual. You followed me? You needed someone to follow you. He looked back at the ruins. Martha wanted this place to be a haven, a place to pray. But I haven't prayed since the day I buried her here. Nayeli walked slowly toward him. It doesn't have to be words, she said. Sometimes standing is a prayer. Sometimes remembering is enough. He looked at her, then at the sky. I used to believe there was a plan, that everything, even pain, had purpose. But now, I don't know. She knelt beside him. The Great Spirit walks where there's dust and fire. So does your God. Not to punish, to remind us we're not forgotten. He looked at her, and for a moment, the past and present blurred. Two survivors, two broken hearts still beating. They rode home together in silence. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting. The air buzzed with tension. Crows circled above the barn. On the fence was a marked charcoal, crude, fresh, a spiral crossed with a jagged line. Caleb froze. What is it? Nayeli asked. He swallowed hard. A war sign. Apache? No, he said. White men. Vance used to brand fences before a raid. Sends a message. She touched the mark, then met his eyes. It's begun, Caleb nodded. Then, so must we. That night, they buried the cross at the base of the cottonwood, where Martha and Daniel rested. Caleb stood still, head bowed, and when he lifted it, something had changed. Not peace, but resolve. He turned to Nayeli. We defend this land, not just for us, for them. She placed a hand on his arm. For all the dead still waiting to be heard. It came with the dust. Late afternoon. The air was hot, thick with stillness. Caleb was chopping firewood by the barn. Nayeli was at the creek, rinsing bandages and watering the seedlings, those tiny green shoots of hope she had planted just days earlier. That's when Voka whinnied. Loud, sharp. Caleb froze. A second later, a gunshot rang, outcracking the silence. Like dry bone, he dropped the axe and sprinted toward the creek. Nayeli had taken cover behind a boulder. She wasn't hit but close. The bullet had torn through her sleeve, grazing her arm. Blood seeped through the cloth, dark and angry. "Riders on the ridge," she shouted. Caleb pulled her behind the barn. From there, he could see them, 4 silhouettes, atop the far hill. Too far to hit, close enough to threaten. One held a rifle high, waving it in slow, mocking arcs. Garrett Vance's voice boomed from the ridge, riding the wind. "Prescott, you got one more night, friend. One. I'll take what's mine by dawn." Then they turned and vanished over the hill. Caleb clenched his fists. "They want us scared." "Oh?" "They want us broken," Nayeli said, pressing cloth to her arm. He helped her inside, cleaned the wound. No words were spoken, just steady hands, shared breaths. That night, they fortified the ranch, boarded windows, moved food and water into the root cellar, nailed a second latch on the cabin door. Caleb positioned his rifles by every corner. Nayeli set up traps, simple ones, learned from her tribe. Snare wires, pressure stones, hidden pits. "Won't hold men for long," she said, "but might buy us a breath." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat on the porch in silence, backs to the wall, eyes scanning shadows. Midnight came. Then 2. The moon rose silver, then dipped behind clouds. And still no attack. But the fear wasn't in the noise, it was in the waiting. Sometime near dawn, Caleb spoke. "I used to think men like Vance were rare, monsters in a world of decent folk. And now? Now I think the world's full of men like him. But maybe, just enough like us to fight back." Nayeli glanced at him. "You're not who you were when I met you." He looked down. "I don't know who I am." She reached for his hand, held it firm. "Maybe that's the start of becoming." As the sun cracked the horizon, Caleb stood and walked to the barn. He opened the gate for Voka, tightened his saddle straps, and fed the horse one last apple. Today would not be for running. Today would be for standing ground. They came with the stars. Caleb heard the hooves first dull and rhythmic like war drums. Then the dogs barked, high and panicked. By the time he reached the porch, shadows were circling the property like wolves. 4 riders. Then 6. Maybe more behind them. Vance rode at the front, wearing a gray duster and a smugness that tasted of rot. "Didn't think I'd keep my word, Prescott?" he called. "Sun's not up yet. Still got time." Caleb raised his rifle. "Turn back." "I will. With what's mine." "Ah." Behind him, the barn lit up. They'd set it ablaze. Flames licked the rafters. The cattle screamed. Nayeli ran for the back gate, water buckets in hand. Caleb fired a warning shot, just missing Vance's shoulder. That's when chaos broke loose. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. One of Vance's men dropped, snared by Nayeli's hidden trap, a scream cut short by the pull of rope and wood. Another tried to flank the cabin. Caleb met him at the door, own clean shot to the chest, but they were too many. The fire roared. The barn collapsed, sending sparks into the sky like fleeing souls. Voka reared in the corral, trapped and wild-eyed. Nayeli raced through the smoke, cutting his tether. "Run!" she shouted, slapping his flank. He bolted into the dark, hooves pounding like thunder. Then Vance entered the yard, pistol drawn. He cornered Nayeli near the trough, grabbed her by the arm. "You're mine," he hissed. "You always were." Calypso red. He charged no rifle, just fury, tackled Vance to the ground. They rolled through the dirt, fists flying, blood mixing with ash. Vance was stronger, but Caleb had purpose. Then came a howl, not from man, but wind. A sudden gust roared through the yard. The fire jumped, but not toward the cabin. It split, as if shoved by unseen hands, racing toward the hills behind. Vance's remaining men, caught in the blaze, scattered like rats. Nayeli grabbed Caleb's rifle, aimed it straight at Vance. He froze, but Caleb stood. "No," he said. "Not like this." He walked to Vance, bleeding. Dan punched him once, hard. Vance fell unconscious. The wind died. The fire dimmed, and silence returned. Nayeli dropped the rifle, looked at Caleb. "You prayed, didn't you?" she asked. He didn't answer. But in the ashes, behind him, the silver cross Martha's cross lay, unburned on the ground. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. Dawn broke slow and cold. Ashes floated through the morning like dying moths. The barn was gone, charred beams clawed at the sky. The fence line had been torn open. 3 head of cattle wandered, disoriented, in the distance. Caleb stood barefoot in the frost, shirt torn, knuckles split open. Vance groaned at his feet, bound at the wrists, a bloodied cloth jammed between his teeth. The man who had arrived with fire and fury was now little more than a shadow of arrogance, reduced to grunts and gasps. Nayeli knelt beside Voka, who had returned, limping but alive. She whispered in Apache, stroking his neck. There were tears in her eyes, but they didn't fall. The world had not ended, but it had changed. A low rumble cut through the quiet. Caleb turned. From the ridge came a line of blue uniforms, dust rising in their wake. 6 riders, U.S. cavalry bayonets gleaming under the rising sun. At their front was a lean man, with a silver mustache and eyes sharp like flint. "Captain Harlan Baker," he introduced, dismounting. "6th Cavalry, out of Fort Huachuca, heard shots, saw smoke." Caleb nodded. "You're late." "We're cavalry," Baker said dryly. "We're always late." The soldiers dismounted, fanned out. When Baker spotted Vance on the ground, his brow furrowed. "Garrett Vance?" Caleb jerked his thumb toward the unconscious body. "He came with fire, left with nothing." Baker crouched. "He's wanted in 2 territories: gun running, bribery, suspected involvement in forced removals, but never had a witness live long enough to testify." "He'll live," Caleb said. "Barely." Nayeli approached, holding the charred medallion and the woven strip. "I have proof," she said. Baker took the items gently, his fingers stilled. "Where did you get these?" "They were my sister's," she said, "and my father's." The captain's face changed, from suspicion to weight. "I knew your father, Sergeant Tallico. He saved my company from ambush in '73. She didn't speak. Baker stood. "I'll make sure this goes to court. Real court, not redemption saloon justice." Caleb watched him closely. "And her?" Baker hesitated. "She's Apache. That complicates things." Caleb stepped forward. "Not for me." The 2 men locked eyes. Then Baker nodded once. "I didn't see her. Just saw a brave woman protecting her land." He turned to his men. "Load Vance. Leave the rest." They rode out within the hour. As the dust settled, Caleb walked back to the cabin. Saturday on the steps. Nayeli joined him. For a while, they just listened to the breeze, to Voka chewing hay, to the sound of nails being hammered back into a door. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," Caleb said. "But he is." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in years, he didn't flinch. They started with the barn. It was all ash and memory now, but Caleb salvaged what he could. A few beams unburned, a hammer with a warped handle. Some nails rusted, but still biting. Nayeli worked beside him, wrapping her wounded arm in clean cloth, dragging timber with her good hand. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Every strike of the hammer echoed like a heartbeat. By the 3rd day, the outline of a new shelter stood smaller, simpler, but steadier. This wasn't just for animals anymore. It was a declaration, a marker on scorched earth that said, "We're still here." That night, Caleb sat at the table, staring at the wooden sign he'd carved. It read, "Grace Ranch." Nayeli entered quietly, carrying a cup of warm beans. She saw the sign and stopped. "What is Grace?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, He picked up the silver cross from beside the window, Martha's cross, now cleaned and polished, strung on a thin leather cord. He handed it to her. "Grace," he said, "is getting more than you deserve." She looked at the cross, then at him. "And what did you get?" He smiled faintly. "Another chance." The next morning, they rode to the cottonwood tree. It still stood tall, leaves rustling like old hymns. Beneath it lay the resting place of Martha and Daniel. Caleb knelt there, hand on the dirt. He didn't speak, only breathed, slow and deep. Nayeli stood nearby, silent. Then, without warning, Caleb began to pray. Not out loud, not in words, just a quiet, trembling prayer from a heart that had bled long enough. He didn't ask for strength. He didn't ask for answers. He gave thanks for the ashes that didn't kill him, for the fire that didn't burn her, for a woman who saw the man beneath the scars. When he stood, his hands were dirty, but his shoulders were lighter. They planted a small cedar near the graves, for memory, for future shade. That night, they shared bread and salt, simple food, but it felt sacred. Before sleep, Nayeli hummed an Apache protection song, and Caleb, holding Martha's Bible, whispered a line he hadn't dared speak in years. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Nayeli looked up. "Your prayer?" He nodded. "Our prayer." The days that followed weren't easy. Rain came hard. Mud swallowed wagon wheels. A fever took one of the calves. And Nayeli's wound, though healing, still flared at dusk with dull fire. But they pressed on. Caleb rebuilt the porch first, said the roof could wait, but a porch, that's where folks breathe. Nayeli mended saddle straps, mixed herbs for teas, and taught him how to find healing roots near the arroyo. They laughed once, just once, but it was real. A neighbor rode in one evening, old Elmer Crowley, from 2 miles north, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words in a decade. He brought eggs and a bag of nails. "Word gets around," he said, nodding toward the half-built barn. "Heard you two stood off the devil and lit his coattails on fire." Caleb chuckled. "Just did what we had to." Crowley nodded again, slow and meaningful. "You did good." And then he left. The next morning, another knock. 2 young boysons of the local blacksmith offered to help lift rafters. Pa said if Mr. Prescott can forgive a redskin and fight off Vance, then maybe the world ain't so cracked after all. Caleb didn't correct them, but he watched as Nayeli handed them water and smiled soft and patient. That afternoon, Caleb found her by the tree line, staring west. "What do you see?" he asked. She didn't turn. Smoke. Far off. Another fire. Number. A signal. "My people. They're still out there. Hiding. Surviving." He waited. She continued. "One day I'll find them. Not to return, maybe, but to tell them I made it. That I wasn't broken." He nodded. "Would you go with me?" she asked. "I would," he said. "Wherever." "Oh." The sun dipped behind the hills, casting the land in gold. Back at the cabin, Caleb nailed the Grace Ranch sign above the new gate. He stepped back, wiping sweat with his sleeve, and stood beside her. "It's not perfect," he said. "No," she replied. "It's better." That night, as stars blinked awake in the velvet sky, they sat on the new porch, side by side, silent. Wovoka dozed in the paddock. The wind was soft. Nayeli lit a small fire. Not for heat, but remembrance. And Caleb, without a word, placed the cross and her medallion side by side on the table between them. No creed, no sermon, just 2 people, 2 stories, 2 roads that had once led through Helen now, finally, crossed into peace. A letter arrived, folded in brown paper, sealed with the emblem of the U.S. Army, delivered by a wiry boy from Fort Huachuca. Caleb read it by lantern light, hands steady, jaw clenched. The words were simple. "Garrett Vance has been convicted. 2 counts of arson, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of unlawful detainment of a civilian of native heritage. Sentence, life imprisonment, Fort Leavenworth. Signed, Captain Harlan Baker." Caleb folded the letter slowly. Nayeli watched him from across the table. "Justice?" He shook his head. "It's something. Not enough, but something. She took the paper, ran her fingers along the edges like reading the wind. In our ways, she said, truth isn't about punishment. It's about balance. Caleb nodded. Then let's find balance. That night, he opened the old trunk beneath his bed. Inside were relics of a different life. A Union cavalry saber, a letter from his father, the Bible with Martha's pressed violets still between its pages, and another letterone he'd never sent. It was addressed to the family of the Apache scout he had once tried to save during the war, a young man named Taji. The letter apologized, explained, promised remembrance. He'd never mailed it. Too afraid, too ashamed. Now, he handed it to Nayeli. "This was your brother," she said, voice flat. Caleb froze. "What?" She held up the medallion. "This symbolizes of the red claw line. Taji was my brother." Silence. It fell heavy, like snow. "I tried to save him," Caleb whispered, "but I failed." Nayeli studied his fastenot with anger, but sorrow. "You didn't fail. You remembered. That's more than most." She placed the letter back in his hand. "It's time to send it." The next morning, they rode out early. Just the two of them, with the letter, the medallion, and a single cedar sapling. They planted the tree near a shallow stream, beneath the watchful gaze of the red cliffs. "For Taji," Caleb said. "And for those who never got names," Nayeli added. As they rode home, the sky opened in a soft spring rain, no thunder, just cleansing. Back at Grace Ranch, Caleb placed Martha's Bible beside the cross, now strung on a new post near the gate. Above it, a second carving appeared. Just one word: remembrance. That night, they lit no fire. They didn't need one. The stars were enough. Weeks passed. Spring bloomed timidly over the plains. Wildflowers poked through scorched earth. The cedar sapling stretched toward the sky like a prayer made of bark and hope. At Grace Ranch, life found rhythm. But there was one thing Caleb hadn't heard: Nayeli's story. Not the one told through wounds or songs, but in her own voice. One evening, after mending a fence together, they sat by the creek. Wovoka grazed nearby. The air was thick with the scent of sage and new rain. "I want to tell you something," Nayeli said. Caleb turned, eyes quiet. "I haven't spoken Apache in months," she continued. "I feared it would be used against me, like it always was." He nodded. "You don't have to." She shook her head. "I want to." Then, in soft syllables that rose and fell like wind over canyon stone, she began. She told him of her mother's songs, sung under moonlight beside riverbeds. Of the night soldiers came, shouting orders no one understood. Of hiding in a root cellar with her little sister, listening to flames devour her childhood. She spoke of running, of being captured, of silence becoming survival, and then of him. Of the first man who didn't look at her like she was a curse, who didn't ask her to be silent. When she finished, Caleb said nothing. He didn't have to. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her something wrapped in cloth. It was a small journal, leather-bound, blank. "Your voice," he said, "should never be silenced again." She opened the first page. Inside, scrawled in his rough handwriting, "To the one whose silence taught me to listen, write it all. I'll be here for every word." Tears Kamina with sobs, but with stillness. She kissed his cheek, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Later that night, under the lantern's warm glow, Nayeli began to write, not in English, not for others, but for herself, for her people, for the truth. And Caleb sat nearby, whittling wood, humming a tune he didn't know he remembered. Two souls, side by side, not as savior and survivor, but as equals, each giving the other what they'd lost: a voice, a home, a beginning. The desert was quiet again, not with fear, not with emptiness, but with the kind of silence that follows a storm, a holy hush. They stood at the edge of Grace Ranch. The land stretched wide, golden under the setting sun. Nayeli had braided her hair with blue feathers Apache for peace after battle. Caleb wore a clean shirt and his father's hat tilted low. "We're leaving tomorrow," she said. He nodded. "To the north," she continued. There's a trading post where some of my people pass through. Maybe I'll find my sister. I'll go with you, Caleb said. She smiled. I know. They turned back toward the house. On the porch sat the Bible, worn and waiting. Caleb picked it up, thumbing through pages that smelled of smoke and rain. He paused at Psalm 34. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. He whispered the words. Then again stronger. Nayeli stepped beside him, placing her hand over his. You found your voice too, she said. No, he replied. I remembered it. He closed the Bible, tucked it under his arm, and led her inside. That night, they packed light just enough food, water, and the journal she had begun. Caleb placed a small cross over the doorframe, hammering it gently into the beam. Not to ward off evil, but to welcome grace. As the fire dwindled to embers, they prayed, not with fancy words or lofty hopes, just thanks. Thanks for mercy, for second chances, for a ride that didn't end in sorrow. They slept early, side by side, beneath wool blankets and stars. Morning came with soft light and cool breeze. They saddled Voka and a mule they'd named Mercy, a gift from Crowley. Before leaving, Caleb turned one last time to the ranch. The gate stood tall. The sign, Grace Ranch, swayed gently, and beneath it, carved fresh beneath the cedar post, were 3 words, by his hand. He didn't say goodbye, only, see you soon. As they rode westward, toward the unknown, the dust rose behind them like incense. And somewhere behind that horizon, a new story waited to be written, with faith, with fire, and with love that had learned how to endure. What impressed you the most about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinions are always a great source of inspiration for us to improve. The ride north wasn't easy. Dust bit their faces. Food ran low. Twice, they had to sleep without fire, huddled beneath canyon overhangs, listening to the restless cry of coyotes. But neither complained. In the quiet miles between footfalls, something deeper Grewa tether not forged in romance, but in shared loss, shared hope, and the kind of trust that comes only after blood and ash. They reached a mission outpost on the 3rd day, a modest adobe chapel, standing alone against the red stone cliffs, roof patched with clay and prayer. Sister Elena greeted them, a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and eyes like dawn. Nayeli recognized her. Elena cared for me after the raid, she whispered to Caleb. Before I was taken again. The nun embraced Nayeli, whispered a blessing in Spanish, and led them inside. The chapel was humble. 1 wooden cross, 1 cracked bell, and a floor swept clean by the hands of children who knew what it meant to begin again. They stayed 3 nights. Caleb helped fix the roof, patch the stable. Nayeli taught local girls how to weave a band that told a story one of fire, flight, and freedom. On the 2nd night, they shared their tale around a low fire in the chapel yard. Sister Elena listened, silent. When Caleb finished, voice rough but steady, Elena handed him a slip of paper. It was a letter from Fort Huachuca. Vance is dead. Injuries from prison brawl. Died screaming about ghosts. His name buried in dishonor. Caleb read it twice, then handed it to Nayeli. He is gone, he said. No, she corrected. He is ended. We are the ones who go on. Before they left, Sister Elena took Caleb aside. You know, she said, it was never about vengeance. He nodded. It's about what you do with what remains. They mounted up again, the mission behind them. Ahead open land, whispered promises, and the first stars of a new night. And somewhere between the trail and the sky, they both knew. They were building not just shelter but sanctuary. 1 board, 1 word, 1 quiet act of grace at a time. 2 months passed. They found a small valley near the Gila River, hidden, fertile, and long forgotten by the road builders and the gold hunters. The place had no name, so Caleb and Nayeli gave it one. Shalah, a Hebrew word drawn from Martha's Bible meaning to pause, to rest, to consider. And so they did. They built a home, not grand, not finished but real, with walls made of adobe and will, a roof of pine and patience, a porch that faced the sunrise, and behind it, a garden, already growing with wild herbs and corn. Caleb carved a post, same as before, and nailed a sign above the door. By his hand. Beside it, Nayeli hung a wind chime made of old spoons and feathers, each one a story, each one a song. Neighbors came, slowly. A widow with 2 sons, a half-blind trapper who wanted quiet more than whiskey, a Navajo couple bringing sheep and silence. Together, they called it a camp, then a hamlet, then quietly, careful a sanctuary. Caleb taught the boys how to shoe a horse, how to shoot only to warn. Nayeli showed the women how to grind corn with rhythm and reverence. On Sundays, they read psalms, then sang in Apache, in Spanish, in English. Each word, a thread in the same tapestry. One evening, a rider came with a bag of letters. One was from Crowley. Redemption's changed. The sheriffs knew. They built a school. People ask about you. Some call you fool. Others call you brave. But all remember. Caleb read it aloud by firelight, then folded it, smiled. He didn't need to be remembered by everyone, only by those whose lives were better because he'd stayed. That night, they watched the stars again, but not with longing, with peace, not because the past was undone, but because they had chosen what to do with what remained, and in choosing had found home. Years passed. The valley changed with the seasons. Children grew tall, chasing the river's bend. The garden flourished. Stories wove themselves into the land. Caleb's hair turned silver like the rim of dawn. Nayeli's eyes grew deeper, wiser like the earth after rain. They never had children of their own, but the valley was full of sons and daughters who knew their names. Sometimes, a traveler would stop and ask, "Who built this place?" The answer was always the same: a man who forgot how to pray, and a woman who taught him how to listen. One autumn morning, Caleb sat on the porch alone. Nayeli was down by the river, teaching songs to a girl who'd lost her father. In his hands, he held the Bible again. Pages worn, corners soft. He opened it not to Psalms or Proverbs but to a blank page at the back. He wrote, slowly, "I once believed God had turned his face from me, but it was I who turned away. In the face of a woman who'd lost more than I ever had, I saw the truth. Grace is not thunder. It is dew. It comes not when we demand but when we're still enough to receive it." He closed the book, stood, and placed it beside Martha's cross, now hung next to a dream catcher woven by Nayeli's hands. 2 faiths, 1 hope. He looked out over the fields where children laughed and animals grazed, and he whispered not loudly, not for others to hear, but just enough for heaven. Thank you, not for survival, but for redemption, for the gift of starting again, for the miracle of not being alone. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting the valley in gold, the wind picked up gently. It rustled the chimes on the porch, stirred the corn, carried the scent of cedar and tobacco, and for those who paused long enough to feel it, it felt like a blessing, not the kind from pulpits or prophets, but the kind etched in calloused hands, in scarred earth, and in stories that end not with triumph but with peace. Years later, children would ask, "Was it true?" They'd whisper, eyes wide under desert stars, "that a loner once built a town from ashes?" Caleb would smile soft, tired, but peaceful, sitting on the porch where Woka once stood, where Martha's Bible still lay open to the Psalms. He never told the whole story. He let Nayeli's journal do that. Every page written in English and Apache was housed beneath a chapel window, free for wandering hands and wondering hearts, not as a monument to pain, but as a testament to grace. One of her final entries read, "We were not saved by running. We were redeemed by staying, not by what we lost, but by what we chose to become." Caleb aged quietly, like driftwood by the river. He taught children to track stars, to bless meals, and to speak truth even when afraid. He never remarried, but he was never alone. Years later, someone carved into the cedar gate of Shelah, "Here lived a man who forgave the world and was forgiven in return." That was all. No tales of glory, only quiet courage, only love that refused to yield. Only faith, sown like seeds on dry ground. We don't choose the age we're born into, but we do choose how we walk through it. Some pains, it seems, could bury a man. Others, they become the ground from which something new can grow. Grace, when it comes, doesn't erase the fire. It teaches us how to walk through it, together. True Wild West stories like this one don't roar, they whisper. In the silence after loss, in the prayers no one hears, in the dust of men who choose kindness over vengeance. If this story reached into your soul, don't let it end here. Share it, hold it, pass it on to those who need to remember. Even in the loneliest corners of history, hope rides again. And by His hand we are never truly alone. Subscribe for more stories of truth, grit, and redemption from the true Wild West.